Hi, my name's Blethen from Walker Scott, and in this series we've covered a wide range of look and feel and navigation within D365 Finance and Operations. In this session, I'll be covering keyboard shortcuts. It should be noted that I'm using a standard D365 Finance and Operations environment, which is with Microsoft's Contoso demo data. So let's jump right in. Now, before we get into the Dynamics 365 shortcuts, we should talk about browser shortcut. So given that it is now a cloud-based solution, there are a number of shortcut keys that are used for browsers. Now, one of the more commonly used shortcuts is F5, which will refresh your browser's page. So if I hit F5, it's going to actually refresh the entire browser page. The next shortcut that I use quite frequently, which is a browser shortcut, is Control F, which is incredibly useful when navigating modules in D365. So for example, if I'm searching for something related to a year end, I can use Control F. It will bring up this little find search box and I can type in year end. So as you can see, the more you type, so if I just type year, I have 5 results and it highlights those on the page. The more you type, the more refined your search is, and you can see I can see the year-end close on the page. The next browser shortcut key I'm going to use is Control N. Now, Control N will actually bring up an entire new browser window. So this can be useful if you're having multiple sessions or you quickly need to bring up a new window. If you do want to bring up just a new tab, however, that is Control T. And what you'll see is if I hit Control T, I now have multiple tabs open. Now you can circulate through these tabs. So for example, if I right click duplicate, you can see that I have another session, and I'm just going to bring up all customers so that you can see that I have multiple tabs open. So I have a tab which is the home page, I have all customers, and then I have a brand new tab here as well. Now, a useful shortcut to navigate between the tabs is holding Control and Tab. And as you can see, if I hit Control Tab, it toggles and circles through those tabs. Now, Control Shift Tab will go backwards through the sequence of tabs. So that is a really useful browser-based shortcuts. In addition to the browser-based shortcuts on your keyboard, we also have zoom capabilities as well. So by holding down Control and scrolling with your mouse, you can actually zoom in and out of your session depending on your screen resolution that you prefer. So as again, I can hit Control and circle on my mouse, and you'll see that I also have some zoom capabilities as well up in the browser session. It should be noted that I'm only covering a handful of shortcuts, and there are many more shortcuts available for browser-based shortcuts, as well as in D365. So now we're going to jump into the D365 shortcuts. And what's great about Dynamics is if you're ever stuck on your shortcuts, you can simply right-click on your page and you can view shortcuts. Now this will pop up with a number of useful shortcuts that are available on the page that you're currently on. So as you can see, there's a number of navigation shortcuts, there's a number of action shortcuts. You can also have some shortcuts to close and save, as well as some other shortcuts like changing companies, exporting to Excel, and also refreshing the page and not the browser. Now, what's great about Dynamics is there are many more shortcuts on offer. And to see those, we can actually click on this View All Product Shortcuts, and it will actually take us to a Microsoft Learn page where we can see there are a huge range of shortcuts available. Now, as I mentioned, I'll only be covering some of these shortcuts and some of the more common ones that I personally use. So with the action shortcuts, what you'll notice is that depending on where you are in Dynamics, you will be using the down arrow and up arrow key to navigate between records. As well as when you're closing out of pages or forms, you can use the escape key, and also we can use the enter or space to select a button or tile as well. Moving on to our date picker shortcuts then, we have some really useful ones which are Alt down arrow, which is commonly used when navigating to and selecting from a drop down, and I'll do a demonstration of that a little bit later on. We also have today's date. So the shortcut to pick up today's date is the letter T. To clear today's date, you can type in the letter C, and pick never, which is sometimes required in certain forms, is the letter N. Moving on to our fact box shortcuts. What you'll notice is some shortcuts actually have multiple shortcuts. So in this case, opening up the fact box pane is a combination of either Alt plus M or Alt B or Control F2. Now in my session, if I navigate to all customers, you can actually hover over some of your icons as well to see what the shortcut keys are. So in this example, related information or fact boxes in my session is Control F2. And in doing so, it brings up the fact box pane. Now moving back to our shortcuts, so we have our filtering shortcuts. And this is incredibly useful if you're a keyboard user. The one that I commonly use is Control G. So what this does, and I'll just collapse that fact pane, is if you're on a particular field in a particular column and you hit Control G, it will bring up the column filters and you can start applying your filters there. Now, to bring up the filter pane to see if you've got any filters applied, we can click on Show Filters, or in my case is Control F3. And to bring up Advanced Filters is Control Shift F3. So, as you can see here, to bring up the Advanced Filters is Control Shift plus F3. We then have our page shortcuts. So to create a new record is actually Alt-N. Now in some previous versions of Dynamics, this was Control-N. That's not the case because this is a browser-based solution. You'll now see that it is Alt-N. The same applies to deleting a record. It is now a combination of either Alt-Delete or Alt-F9. And saving records is Alt plus S. You can also revert, so Control Shift F5 if you've made a mistake, or you can hit Escape on your keyboard and then the prompts to whether you would like to save or not save will be available. As I mentioned earlier, we can also refresh just the page and not the browser with Shift F5. We also have some toggles. So if you're currently not in edit mode, you can simply press F2 to go into edit mode. We then have some useful navigation features on pages such as how to add attachments, which is Control Shift A, export to Excel, which is Control Shift E, and we also have some commands to shift between records. So you can shift between records with Control Up, Control Down, and you can also move to the first record. So if you've got a very large data set or a very large grid, you can use Control Home or Control End. We then have our page navigation shortcuts. And to move between different fields, you simply hit Tab on your keyboard. To move backwards to a previous field is Shift Tab. Now, there are some exceptions to this, and that can be when you're entering journals. You can use your arrow keys on your keyboard to toggle between things like financial dimensions when entering journals. There are some additional shortcuts here where we can move to the next fast tab. So to move to the next fast tab is Alt Shift plus the down arrow, or to move up a fast tab is Alt Shift up arrow. We also have some useful shortcuts where you can collapse your fast tabs with Alt O. You can also switch to grids and detailed views, so Control Shift plus G will switch to the grid view, and to switch to the details view is Control Shift D. To switch or toggle between header and lines is Control Shift H and Control Shift L for lines. Moving on to our grid shortcuts. So naturally you can also use your mouse wheel as well for scrolling up and down the page. What you may not know though is if you hold Shift and your mouse wheel, you can move horizontally through the grid if there are lots of fields. So that is incredibly useful on large screens. Sometimes screens such as purchase orders or sales orders have many fields, and you can horizontally scroll by holding Shift and your mouse wheel as well. Now we've talked about moving to previous records, and these are the same when you're in grid views as well. So Tab and Shift Tab will move you to the previous or next column. You can also move between your rows using your down and up arrow keys as well. And then, as I mentioned, moving between the first record and the last record is either Control Home or Control End. Now, as I previously mentioned, there are lots and lots of shortcuts available, and I am just covering a select few. Moving on to then input control shortcuts. So to open hyperlinks is hitting Control and Enter, and sometimes when you're in a focus mode, you will simply hit Enter on your keyboard as well. As we've discussed earlier, if you need to enter today's date, you can simply hit the letter T. Scrolling down then, for messaging shortcuts, to go to the message center is simply Control Shift F7. And from navigation shortcuts, to go to the home dashboard is Alt Shift Home. To move to the navigation pane, there's a few combinations there. To move between companies or the company picker is Control Shift O. And moving on to personalization. So we've covered the personalization tool in a separate session, but if you do want to bring in the personalization toolbar, you can hit Control Shift P, and then you have a wide series of shortcut keys for the personalization toolbar. Now moving on to entry shortcuts. So one of the more common ones is this Alt down arrow. I'm going to jump into Dynamics just to quickly show that in action. So if I click into this particular record, and I could use F2 to toggle between edit mode, what you'll see is some of these have drop-down options. Now, to bring that up on the keyboard, you simply hit Alt down, and it brings the table and the record into play. So you can then use your arrow keys to toggle between the records, and then you can simply hit Enter to then select those values. So Alt down is really common and really powerful when you're using your keyboard, and if you're a keyboard warrior and like to just use your shortcut keys on the session, then Alt down is one that you will commonly find. Now if I tab across, that's going to tab into the classification group, and I can use Alt down again to then select a particular value, and I can hit Tab or Shift Tab to move back between a field. Alt down, and then you can use your down and up arrow keys on your keyboard, and then Enter to select before tabbing onto the next fields. Moving on to Task Recorder, which we will be covering in a separate session, you have a number of shortcut keys for Task Recorder, such as stopping the recording or moving between the guides as well. So less commonly used, but there are shortcuts also available for Task Recorder. So in summary, there are a huge amount of shortcuts available in D365, not only from a product, but also in a browser setting. And if you are unsure, you can simply right-click and click View Shortcuts to get a summary of the available shortcuts. But also, if you're looking for some more handy shortcuts, you can click the View All product shortcuts, and that will take you to a Microsoft Learn page where you can learn about all the shortcuts that are available. Thank you.